Congress has voted to officially designate a memorial site honoring the victims of the Pulse Nightclub Massacre, just one day before friends and family will commemorate the 5th anniversary of the nation's second deadliest shooting. The site, which will be called the National Pulse Memorial, will be located near the nightclub where the nightclub once stood, and will honor the 49 people who died and the 53 others who were wounded in Orlando, Florida on June 12, 2016. The site will be officially designated the memorial site, now headed by President Biden, for deaths to be signed into law. Joining me now to discuss is Pulse shooting survivor Brandon Wolf and the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Alphonso David. Brandon, thank you for joining me, sir. Just tell me how you're doing as we approach this 5th anniversary.
Well, thank you for asking. I would be lying to you if I told you that it wasn't a very difficult time to be here in Central Florida, to be a survivor of the shooting. We call it the ugly cry moment, when you finally reach your breaking point and the emotions catch up to you. I had a couple of those today. And I know that tomorrow is going to be incredibly emotional for the entire community. I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in there, but it is a challenging time for sure.
Alphonso, can you just talk to us about, 90% of the people who were killed at the Pulse nightclub were Hispanic. Before that, for 43 years, the deadliest attack on LGBT people in America had been the Upstairs Lounge in New Orleans, where most of those people were black people. We have black trans people, the subject of tremendous violence in America. How do you see this, the violence directed at LGBT people of color in particular, and how grave of a concern that is?
Well, first, for having me tonight, Brandon. Thank you for doing what you do, which is raising and elevating the voices of those we lost. Charles, look, I think we live in a country, unfortunately, where being LGBTQ has exposed people to violent decades. And if you're black, you're brown, it's even worse. Last year, we had at least 44 transgender people killed in this country. It is not on the fringes of the newspapers. This year alone, we have at least 28 transgender and gender non-conforming people who killed because of their identity. Any active stand
we're
with
having
that
a little
is
bit of trouble, Alphonso. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you, so they're going to try to work on that a little bit. I'm going to turn to you,
Sure.
Brandon. Florida Governor DeSantis slashed $900,000 in funding from programs that serve LGBT people in Central Florida, including a program that provides mental health services to survivors and family members of victims of the Pulse nightclub mass shooting. He did that one day after he signed into law a controversial measure that bans transgender women from participating in girls' and women's high school and college sports teams. How do you feel about what the governor of Florida is doing and how he's responding to LGBT people in that state?
Well, it's impossible not to look at the timing of these acts from Governor DeSantis, not to look at the language that he's using and feel it's personal. I want to add one caveat to what you said. The trans sports ban also applies to middle school students. So if you think about the fact that we've been in a pandemic now for some time, that 36,000 plus Floridians lost their lives in the last year to COVID-19. Think about all the people who've been impacted by our almost criminally under-resourced unemployment system. And then you think about the fact that Governor Ron DeSantis' priority was kicking middle school kids off their soccer team so that he could score some political points. And then he followed that press conference up where he misgendered trans girls time and time again and used his own small child as a prop by slashing funding for the most marginalized people in society, slashing funding for mental health resources for people like me. It feels personal when the governor does something like that. Listen, I think it's no mistake. It's not an accident. None of these acts are, happenstance or coincidence. Governor Ron DeSantis wants to run for president in 2024, and his cronies, the GOP legislators who helped ram these things through against the will of the Floridian people, also want to get elected in a state that Donald Trump expanded his win in. And so what we're seeing is that they've determined those political ambitions have to be built on the backs of marginalized people. And that largely means, unfortunately, LGBTQ people. It largely means LGBTQ people of color, and it certainly means trans kids. I think it's disgraceful. I think it's shameful. I think it's particularly hurtful that we should be celebrating Pride Month, that we should be reflecting on 5 years since 49 of our siblings were murdered. And instead, we have to continue to push back against the transphobic and homophobic agenda of this governor and his GOP friends in the legislature.
Right. We have Alphonso back, but he's on the phone. Alphonso, let me just ask you, what do you think we should, what is the most important thing to get accomplished going forward? Is it gun reform as relates to what happened at the Pulse nightclub? Is it more LGBTQ awareness? Is it a lifting up of vulnerable people within the LGBT community? I think there's something about achieving gay marriage that gave some people the notion that everything was solved, but there are still people within the community that are struggling. What do you think is the most important thing that has to happen coming out of this?
Well, yes, Charles, and apologies for our connecting problems, but let me just say this. I think at its core, we need to make sure that we do a lot more education work and awareness. There's a fundamental distinction between having LGBTQ people be recognized for having the ability to get married, for instance, and actually having the ability to function in our democracy as full-fledged citizens. There's so many LGBTQ people in this country that are not free. You cannot be free in this country if you are afraid of walking home at night because you're transgender. You cannot be free in this country because you're Black and gay and you face discrimination. So we have to make sure that we address the indifference that LGBTQ people of color face in this country, and that is largely by awareness. In addition to that, we do need policies. We do need legislation. We need the Equality Act that would provide comprehensive legal protections to LGBTQ people. We need police reform and transformation. Many people don't talk about this, but yes, LGBTQ people do fall victims to police violence as well. And so we need to make, and unfortunately, they're also Black and brown. So we also need to make sure that we're advancing policies, gun reform, police reform, the Equality Act, to make sure that the most marginalized members of our community are actually protected, because we're not. And we have not been for a very, very long time.
Brandon and Alphonso, I want to thank you for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. And we're thinking about all the survivors of that shooting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.